In 1957, in a quiet English town, two little girls lost their lives in a tragic accident. A year later, their parents gave birth to twins, who seemed to remember a life they never lived. They spoke of toys they'd never owned, described a home they'd never been inside, and even recalled the moment they died. This is the story of the Pollock Twins, a case that still haunts psychologists, believers, and skeptics alike. A mystery that began with unbearable loss and ended with the question, can love really bring someone back?
Hey, you found Hidden Truths. This is where we dig into strange stories, mysteries, and the stuff people don't usually talk about. Let's see what's really hiding underneath.
It began in Hexham, England, a small market town surrounded by rolling green fields. John and Florence Pollock lived in a modest home with their two daughters, Joanna, 11, and Jacqueline, 6. The sisters were inseparable. Joanna, the older one, was calm and motherly. She helped tie Jacqueline's shoes, guided her at church, and often said she would look after her forever. Jacqueline was the opposite, playful, curious, and a little clumsy. Their laughter filled every room, but on May 5th, 1957, everything changed. That morning, the girls were walking to church with a family friend. The air was still, the road quiet. Then a car came speeding down the street, driven by a woman who days earlier had lost her own child. Distraught and unfocused, she lost control. The car jumped the curb. In seconds, all three children were struck. When John reached the scene, his heart broke. Two small bodies lay covered in white sheets. He fell to his knees. Florence fainted when she saw them. Her daughters were gone. Just like that. The Pollocks buried their daughters on a grey, silent morning, but the grief didn't end there. It deepened. Florence stopped eating. John spent sleepless nights pacing the hallways. Friends urged them to move forward, but John couldn't. He began to say something that made Florence angry and frightened. He said their girls would come back, not in heaven, but here. He believed in reincarnation, a belief that clashed with Florence's Catholic faith. He told her, "They'll return to us. God will bring them back in another form." Florence begged him to stop. She thought grief had broken his mind, but he wouldn't let go. Months later, he claimed he'd seen them in dreams. The same faces, calling out to him. He took it as a promise. A year passed, and then, in October 1958, Florence found out she was pregnant again. Doctors told her it was a single pregnancy, but John shook his head. He said calmly, "It's twins. That's how they'll return." Florence dismissed it. There were no twins in their family. But on October 4th, she gave birth to two baby girls, Jillian and Jennifer. The moment John saw them, his heart stopped. Jennifer had a small birthmark above her right eye, exactly where Jacqueline once had a scar. She also had another birthmark on her waist, in the same place as Jacqueline's. John whispered, "They're back." Florence turned pale. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, but deep down she couldn't. The twins grew quickly, and from their earliest days, their parents noticed something strange. Jillian acted older, protective, calm, just like Joanna. Jennifer was attached to her sister, nervous and full of energy, just like Jacqueline. When they learned to speak, the strange similarities deepened. They would talk about our other house and our old toys. Florence scolded John, accusing him of feeding them stories, but he hadn't. One afternoon, when the girls were 3, Florence opened a box of old toys that had once belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. Before she could say anything, the twins ran over. Jennifer picked up a doll and said, "That's mine." Gillian shouted, "No, that's mine. Santa brought it for me." Florence froze. That argument, word for word, had happened years before between her first daughters. She closed the box in silence. As the twins grew older, the past seemed to follow them. They both developed a deep fear of cars. When Florence tried crossing the street with them, Jennifer screamed, "The car! It's coming for us." Her face went pale. Her hands shook. Florence never told them about the accident. No one did. At night, the twins would cry, describing dreams of impact and flashing lights. Florence began to wonder if she was losing her mind, or if John had been right all along. When the twins turned 4, the Pollocks decided to return to Hexham. They hadn't been there since the tragedy. The family drove quietly through the old town. John and Florence didn't mention a word about their past life there. But as they passed familiar streets, the twins began to point. "That's our school," said Jennifer. "That's where we bought the candy," said Gillian. Florence felt her breath catch. The girls had never been there before. They even recognized the playground behind the church. And when they saw the schoolyard, they ran toward it, laughing. Florence broke down in tears. John held her and whispered, "They've come home." The resemblances didn't stop there. The twins liked the same foods, games, and clothes that Joanna and Jacqueline had loved. They even played the same imaginary games the older sisters once did. Gillian often acted like a little mother, brushing Jennifer's hair, helping her get dressed, just like Joanna used to. And Jennifer followed every move she made. Florence started keeping notes, a diary of every strange word or action. She didn't want to believe it, but every new day made denial harder. Word of the Pollock twins spread quietly through England. Eventually, it reached Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia who had spent years studying children who claimed to recall past lives. He traveled to England and interviewed the family multiple times through the 1960s and 70s. Stevenson documented more than 30 separate parallels between the deceased sisters and the twins. Their personalities, their fears, their favorite foods, even matching handwriting styles. He wasn't a mystic, he was a scientist. Yet he concluded that the case showed evidence suggestive of reincarnation. Even skeptics admitted the coincidences were hard to dismiss. Still, not everyone believed. Many psychologists said John's grief might have influenced the twins, that they learned details subconsciously, perhaps from overheard conversations. Florence considered it too, but one thing didn't fit. The girls remembered things even she had forgotten, like the exact layout of the garden or the old paint shop her husband once owned. They even mentioned a specific toy chest in their old home, one Florence had sold years ago. When asked how they knew, Jennifer simply said, "Because we used to keep our crayons there." By the time the twins were 5, the memories began to fade. The talk of Hexham stopped. They no longer mentioned the accident. Dr. Stevenson noted that such memories often fade by age 7, as if a door slowly closes between two lives. Florence was relieved, yet heartbroken. For years she'd been torn between faith and fear. hope, and loss. Now, the echoes of her first daughters were vanishing again, but this time, peacefully. Years later, when Gillian was a teenager, she had a vivid dream. She described herself as a small girl, playing in a garden outside a white house with iron gates. John froze. It was Joanna's old childhood home, a place Gillian had never seen. He showed her a photograph. Gillian stared for a moment and whispered, "That's it. That's where I used to live." She never brought it up again, but John smiled quietly that night. For him, it was confirmation. He died years later, believing God had allowed his daughters to return. The Pollock twins grew up and built ordinary lives. They married, had children of their own, and eventually stopped talking about their strange childhood. When interviewed decades later, they both said the same thing, that their early memories felt like dreams fading at sunrise. But even as adults, their resemblance to Joanna and Jacqueline, in mannerisms, voice, and presence, was undeniable. The case became one of the most famous in reincarnation research, cited in scientific journals and documentaries for decades. So what really happened? Were Gillian and Jennifer truly reincarnations of their sisters? Or were they mirrors? Reflections shaped by grief, love, and loss. Science says memory can't survive death. Faith says souls can. And somewhere between those two beliefs lies this story. A quiet family in a small English town, haunted not by ghosts, but by love that refused to die. Florence once said in her final interview, "I stopped asking why." Maybe it wasn't about proof. Maybe it was about healing. Maybe they came back because I couldn't let them go. The Pollock twins case endures not because it proves anything, but because it reminds us that the line between life and death, between memory and mystery, is thinner than we think. Maybe souls do return. Maybe love is just too powerful to end. Or maybe some stories simply refuse to fade. Some mysteries end with answers. This one ends with a heartbeat and two souls finding their way home.